of March 14th, 2023. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Tripp?
Here.
Mr. Peters?
Here.
Ms. Myers?
Here.
Ms. Shudak?
Here.
Mr. Arthur?
Here.
Mr. Kazire?
Present.
Mr. LaFurla?
Here. And next, if you will, please join me in a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we have approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval of our agenda.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda has been approved. Next, we have approval of the minutes from the regular business meeting of February 28th, 2023. Is there a motion?
I can move to approve the minutes from the regular business meeting of February 28th, 2023 as presented.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the minutes have been approved. Next, we have public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board. And we do have several people that requested this time this evening, many on the Crescent School decision, but a couple of other ones, and I think we'll start with those. And before we get started with the public comment, I just wanted to mention a couple of things about public participation, just to address some questions regarding the open meetings and public participation at these meetings that were brought forth at the last board meeting. So the board policy, which is governed by Iowa Open Meetings Law and regulated by the Iowa Association of School Boards, allows for school boards to allow for public participation in the meetings, and we do. And these are meetings of the board, and the purpose of the public participation is to allow members of the public to share their concerns and ideas or any other comments. And typically, we do not engage in debate. I know there was a question about having a dialogue. We do limit the amount of time that public participants have in addressing the board. So in honor of your time and to ensure that there's no debating ideas at the public meeting, we typically do not respond to questions or things. We may ask clarifying questions just to make sure that all of the board members understand the comments that you're making. And part of the reason why we don't engage in dialogue back and forth is so that it doesn't appear that one board member is speaking for the board. So we do have on the agenda an informational presentation on the Crescent School right after public participation, and that'll be an opportunity for the board to engage in a dialogue and discussion about Crescent School, and hopefully if you have questions during the public comment, we'll be able to address most of those questions during that time. Just for time purposes, our board policy does allow for us to restrict the public comment on one particular topic to 30 minutes. We may or may not do that. It just kind of depends on how much time we end up spending on that this evening. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the comments on a couple of other things that people requested time on. That way we can group some of the other comments about Crescent School together. So first person that requested time is Francis Mearswa. Are you here? Hi, thank you. Come on up to the podium, please.
Hi, Fran Mearswa, 213 West Ferndale Drive, Council Bluffs, Iowa, 51503. Well, unfortunately, elections have results. None of this is really a surprise. This is exactly what the governor and the legislature told us they were going to do, and here we are, and we're all facing the consequences of it. So that's where we're at. This is what we're dealing with. First up, 3 items I'd like to talk about. First, the Crescent closure. I think it's a huge mistake. I do have some personal experience with that school, and it's an exceptionally special school. It serves a very unique part of this district. And if you look at the direction of growth for our county, we're putting millions of dollars through the boards of supervisors up in that area, investing millions of dollars. That's where things are growing. That's where families are going to be moving to. That's the next frontier for this school district. Second, the process. I'm going to encourage everybody here to be very open and transparent about this process and to solicit information and seek solutions with the participants, everybody, the teachers. It's more than unfortunate, but let's not have tops-down decisions that don't have input from the experts, from the educators, from the parents, the people that are involved, please. And I'm also going to encourage, third, I'm going to encourage the board to be very honest about the non-financial impacts of some of these decisions. We're facing some decisions because of financial issues. That's a given. The second, though, but if we look at things like loss of arts, what does that mean? What is losing some level of, let's say, music at an education level? Are we going to be then not having the support for things like orchestra, the students who want to participate in things like orchestra and band down the road? That's a very real possibility. So be very honest about those measures of success or performance, and set those in place so that you can look back in a year or two and say, is this working for us? And that's what I'm going to encourage the board to do, and be very honest about this and engage with all the participants. Particularly with the Crescent school closure, that does hit close to home. It's a very special school. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Bob Hansen. Are you here, Mr. Hansen? Thank you. Come on up.
Bob Hansen, I'm the CBA President and Chief Negotiator, and I wanted to talk about our contract and our collaborative relationship with the district, and especially HR Director Gary Milborn. He's been a great help these last few years. Negotiations were again tough because of the financial situation the district and the state is in, but when our discussions happened, we were able to get some language that we had been pushing for several years into the contract, which has not happened in several years. The 3% increase, though certainly not what we would hope for, was very generous given this financial situation. I also wanted to talk about the sick leave buyout. That's going to be a great benefit for many people when they get to the retirement age. Very appreciative of that. That was something that Gary and the CBA discussed during Labor Management Committee, which is a meeting that we have roughly once a month, and we talk about big issues, we talk about small issues. It's an informal way for the CBA and the district to talk through problems. It's about problem solving. We've talked about sub-fill rates. How do we get that situated, because teachers don't like having to cover classes, and the district has been very, very open to anything we had to say about that. What else did I? Oh. Even though we didn't get everything in the contract that we wanted, we do think it's a very good compromise for both parties. We would like to have had some other language that was taken out when Chapter 20 was changed back in the contract. The district was very open and proposed 3 changes that we are very supportive of. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you to the district, thank you to Gary, and we hope that the contract would pass the board vote tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. And I think that brings the other topics to a close, so I'll move on to those of you who have requested time to speak this evening on Crescent. There were 8 individuals who requested time in advance. You'll receive 5 minutes to speak. And then we had 3 additional individuals who requested time this evening when you arrived. So we'll start with those who requested time in advance. And again, you will have 5 minutes, and just kind of depending on how things go, we may, if we need to, limit time on this topic. First is Michelle Hargens. Hargens?
Michelle Hargens, 114 East Welch Street, Crescent, Iowa. Good evening, Dr. Merle and Board of Education members. I come to you tonight as a Crescent parent, a parent-teacher organization member, a Crescent community member, and a Crescent councilwoman. I hope you are here with an open mind, because numbers as in children and numbers as in money is just 2 pieces of the puzzle in ensuring that Crescent Elementary and the Crescent community thrives. I can say I've been in your shoes, the person sitting on the other side of the table, with others looking to me for answers and support. I know that there are situations that may arise that you did not ask to be put in, but as leaders, we know what we signed up for. We also know the oath that we took regarding the positions we are responsible for upholding. Part of your oath of office, I will faithfully and impartially, to the best of my ability, discharge the duties of the office. Sometimes the decisions you might face are the ones you may have thought of, but not mentally prepared for. In order to make that decision, you need to do research, make sure the information given to you by the administration is correct and transparent, and to hear what the public or the community has to say. I feel that you have all been put in a difficult, unfair position regarding the recommendation of the closure of Crescent Elementary. I have handouts I was going to give you. I apologize for not getting them to you ahead of time. In the bullet points that Dr. Morell attached to the letters that were sent out on February 27th, 2023, I was going to address those. There have been some follow-throughs on the district's end, but for a few years. Things, in my opinion, and some are facts, I feel that it fell short and Crescent Elementary was forgotten about. Having welcome back picnics is a wonderful thing. I believe maybe there was only one that was attended by some people. Sending direct mail to area households, for how long and how many were done. Called area residents and families who enrolled elsewhere and invite them back. I do know that we had a previous person in the Crescent Elementary building that worked very hard at doing this, and her work is definitely gone without notice. Developing a slogan. I do know an open house was conducted with a great turnout. There was Project Lead the Way that was implemented for 2 years, I believe. What is the status of that project? What about the preschool edition? Still being a goal, but it won't be realized this fall, according to Dr. Morell in August of 2017. I also know as a leader there are things that may come your way that you cannot control, such as COVID, legislative measures, and in Crescent's case, a flood in 2019. All schools were affected by COVID. There is a comment that the above efforts have not resulted in growth, but rather declined since 2017. As leaders, there was and is a time to stand up and say as a district, what can we do to help Crescent Elementary thrive? As a councilwoman, I would not settle for my community drowning or struggling. There was no communication to the community, as stated in your job duties, using ongoing two-way communication and transparency to build trust, support among community members, board members, superintendent, staff, and students. Another responsibility of yours is ensuring the creation of shared visions, plans, goals that reflect common values and core beliefs of the school community. I personally, as a parent, community member, and a councilwoman, have never had anyone approach me or the school via any communication regarding there being an issue with the enrollment of the student numbers. I feel a meeting or a letter should have been given to parents, community members, way in advance to let them know of this concern, rather than receiving a letter a few weeks ago. A lot of emotion and questions could have been prevented had there been communication to all those that would have been affected. Even incoming kindergarten parents were unaware that Crescent is being recommended for closure. I ask yourself why numbers are down. You have scared our community multiple times. No one should have to feel unsure of their children's future education. No one in a community should have to feel unsure. This is not acceptable. I feel that Crescent Elementary, along with the Crescent community, has been embarrassed multiple times. I'm not trying to bash anyone, but I'm letting the real concerns be known. Some of the things that have taken place is isolating Crescent Elementary from the rest of the schools in the district. Why are children who have the promise to succeed in 5th grade, why do all of them go to Iowa Western, but Crescent Elementary students stay at their own school? It appears as though the schools within the city of Council Bluffs are almost like Hawaii, and Crescent is just an island off to the side that's forgotten about. Where are our supporters at? Rooting our school on, giving new ideas to the school, parents and the community to succeed. I say this not to hurt anyone, but just to state the facts.
Michelle, that's 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Dana Reeve.
Hello, board members. I appreciate the time to talk to you about Crescent Elementary. My name is Dana Reeve, and I just want to be able, I am not a speaker by any means, but I am a voice for my children. And I have 5 children currently that go to Crescent Elementary School. I want to bring out that on your Council Bluffs website, it states that Crescent Elementary School is the heart of the community. Well, Crescent Elementary is not only the heart of the community, but it's also the heart and community for my children. Okay, a little history just about me. I have 14 children. I've been through Council Bluffs schools many times, and have experienced a lot with different public schools, private schools, and specialty schools as being a parent. We know that schools have larger classrooms, lower teacher ratios, and the struggle to be able to provide adequate support for any child that's struggling. Our children that attend Crescent Elementary School, okay, we also have children that have unseen disabilities. Okay. Before they attended Crescent Elementary School, they demonstrated a lot of antisocial, withdrawn behaviors, lack of confidence, on top of learning disabilities. And if you know any of these children, you know that these children do not adjust to change quietly. Crescent Elementary has been the first school that my children showed any academic progress and any motivation to even go to school. Many days they would cry because they were sick, because they wanted to go to Crescent. They wanted not to miss a day of school. They love their school today, where in the past that was not an option. Crescent teachers have been able to identify, modify, support, and care for each one of my children, no matter what was going on in their lives. They experience the same structure and learning environment in their daily routine. Crescent Elementary is my children's heart and community. The teachers and staff are Crescent Elementary School's superheroes to my children. The families of Crescent have, and still do, come together to support Crescent Elementary School. It has been support more than I have ever seen any community support their school. And believe me, I have been in a lot of communities. As I think back, as I was picking up children from other schools, because I also provide childcare, you know, parents talk, as you know, parents talk. And so many times I heard in the past, well, if Crescent had a preschool, then I could just enroll my preschooler, and then the rest of my kids would go to preschool and go to elementary school there. And I didn't think about that until I heard about the possible closing of Crescent. And I'm thinking, well, wasn't there supposed to be a preschool? Because if there was, My kids would have been there too. As in closing, your website has mentioned that the Crescent mission is to promote a school environment that encourages intellectual, emotional, social, and physical growth of each child at Crescent Elementary School. This is an important mission statement to Crescent Elementary children, families, and the community. I brought my children here today. And they're here today because they want to be seen and heard. They take pride and value in their education at Crescent Elementary School, and they do not want to lose it. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Shea.
Well, I hope not to take 5 minutes. Should probably start the timer, right? Okay, my name's Shea. I live on the Lincoln Highway in Crescent, Iowa. And I'm a product of the Council Bluffs Community School System. Went to Reeve, Wilson, graduated from TJ in '73. Geez. There's a lot of things I want to tell you about my experiences. I've been elected to the Board of Supervisors and served on the City Council in Crescent. I'm currently on the Board of Adjustments. I like to think I'm pretty good at serving my community. And I'm here to serve my community and the families and children that go to school in Crescent. Man. You know, it's so hard for me to get up here, and this is my 4th time through this in the city of Crescent. My children were in school there, and they had a closure. Jack Holder was the principal then. So it's not 3 times. This is my 4th time through this. You know, and then after the fire, we fundraised to keep Crescent open, to subsidize the insurance money, to keep Crescent open and keep it viable. We've worked hard to do that. Okay, let me see if I can get through these notes. The history of the Crescent School is Henry A. Terry donated the property. Crescent built that school in 1958. And then mandates came along and said we had to affiliate with the high school. So here we are. Here we are. You know, Mr. Wilson, I called you the other day and talked to you about the budget. I've got extensive experience in government budgets. I know what you guys are going through. It's tough. You got state and federal mandates. I get it. I get it. But particularly when I did learn from you that we've got a $130 million budget in the Council Bluffs public school system. Over $130 million. So now the point to balance the budget is to pick on less than 1% of your total budget. We are $930,000 in the budget. I did learn that in the phone call. And my understanding is that all of the employees of the school are going to end up being placed in another spot here in the school system. And let me look at these numbers. The budget's $935,000. The salaries and benefits, $606,000 on the salaries, $216,000 on the benefits. That's $822,000. You know, when the article came out and said you're going to save $935,000 in the budget, I take exception to that. You know, I've sat in your chairs. I get it. I'm asking you to represent my community and the children of my community. That's what I'm asking you to do. And if you need help in the budget in specific ways, I have extensive experience, and I would be willing to come in and help in any way possible. We formed the Crescent Community School Alliance. I have a 501(c) nonprofit. We've collected money to put a daycare and preschool in our school. We fundraise it. And we can't get cooperation from the school board to even get a request for proposals to put what we need to draw people into our community. Okay, 26 seconds. Wasn't quite the way I thought it would go, but I want to thank you for your service. Dean, we'll be talking in the future. I have plans. Thank you.
Shana Zordel.
Hi, my name is Shana Zordel. I'm at 513 Iowa Avenue in Council Bluffs. As a parent of Crescent Elementary students, I recently received notification of a proposal to close our school. The data shared and the audience it was shared with was selective, and the timing sent a clear message that no dialogue or input was needed. As a stakeholder in this school, I have questions. Why was the proposal shared with the public only 1 month prior to the school board vote? Why hasn't a preschool been established there when every other elementary school in the district has one? Have we recognized that Crescent has not been on even ground with the other schools in this way? And this one fact alone is a huge barrier to its enrollment? Does the looming threat of closing Crescent Elementary for the third time or fourth time in recent years contribute to where families choose to enroll their children? Is this creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of low enrollment? Have there been any global pandemics in the last 5 years that might affect enrollment figures? Does the graph showing the decline in Crescent's enrollment surprise you? Or does it make it no different than any other school in the district or in the country? What resources does the district feel are lacking at Crescent? Do students, families, and teachers share that sentiment? Has anyone asked them? How do students at Crescent measure up to other elementary students in the district? What data exists to prove that there is a greater need for these services beyond what is offered at Crescent? 5 years ago, the district reported that closing the school would save the district $180,000. Where does the recently reported $935,000 in savings figure come from? Could those details be made public? How much revenue is generated for the school district from Crescent taxpayers? Do they cover the per pupil cost of Crescent students? Where do Crescent taxpayers want their money to go? How much would it cost to bus Crescent students to the proposed new schools? And how would that alter their daily schedule? How would the boundary changes affect other current and future students in the district? And do these students realize that this proposal may displace them from their home school as well? This decision has big consequences and should not be made quickly or lightly. I urge you to research this matter further and talk to the people this would affect. Crescent Elementary fulfills needs for rural families that other schools in the district cannot. The value of having this local school is more than evident. Crescent Elementary has a positive atmosphere. The building itself is in excellent condition. The students perform well academically. The local support is strong. That's why a Crescent resident donated the land for the sole purpose of building a school there. And that's why residents of Crescent continue to raise funds, organize events, and fight to save their school. Please send the message to Crescent that their community matters. Spend money on Crescent students in their community instead of busing them outside of it. With support from the school district, Crescent Elementary can continue to fulfill its role as a vibrant learning center and community hub with enrollment numbers that will increase over time. Many new homes are currently under construction, new families are moving in, and Crescent is thriving. Please give us a fighting chance and uphold the district's mission that our students, including those in Crescent, have more choices, more opportunities, and more ways to succeed.
Thank you. Deborah Overturf.
Hi, I'm a grandmother of 2 Crescent Elementary students. 2 years ago, our children joined the virtual academy to navigate the pandemic. What we found was a little gem of a school. After the first semester of virtual learning, we chose to drive to Crescent from Council Bluffs every day in order to maintain continuity for our children and have been doing so for their first 2 years of school. We were not disappointed in the caring staff, the well-maintained school, and the happy children we found there. Little did we know that this wonderful little community of Crescent, Iowa, has endured not 1 or even 2 threatened school closures in the past number of years, but this is now at least the 3rd time. Somehow, however, the community has maintained an excellent school and environment for the children that attend there. Though we willingly drive some 20 minutes there and back twice every school day, we clearly see what a burden this can be to a family. The alternative is busing, where young children can expect very long days on the bus to attend a school that is not better than the one they have. It is not as if the taxpayers of Crescent, Iowa, do not support the school when I understand that over 50% of their taxes go into the Council Bluffs School District. We feel blindsided by the push to integrate the local students into schools far from their community. Obviously, this is going to be a hardship for many families. It is going to lower the area's attractiveness to new residents, especially those with young families. It will decrease their home values significantly, take away their sense of community, but most importantly, rob young kids of the right to their own local school. And in such a town such as Crescent, Iowa, the town would lose its heart. Crescent Elementary offers a great educational and social experience for this community's children and is ranked #1 in the district by U.S. News and World Report. Something to really be proud of. The teachers really do attend to the learning diversity, and they have effectively addressed the entire range of learning needs of these students. My daughter was a special education teacher for some years, yet gives Crescent School the highest personal rating, as evidenced by the fact that she chose this school for her own children. It should concern the school board that the discussions to close the school were kept private until the last minute. Families from the community were not given a fair and decent opportunity to respond to the notion that the community's children are apparently slated to be uprooted. Parents and children were given 1 month between the notification and the pending school board vote. New parents with students-to-be didn't get any notice at all. Imagine the surprise of the few who somehow stumbled upon the news as they eagerly await the kindergarten roundup. Further, imagine how many will not even hear of the news until it is too late for them to have their voices heard. Keep in mind that teachers who really love Crescent School are unable to speak up as they are absorbed into new positions within the district. When considering the costs involved in a decision to close Crescent School, consider that for the community of Crescent, Iowa, this is their one and only local school. Once closed, the infrastructure that is now in place will be lost for likely all time, and Crescent will never really rebound. But most of all, consider the real cost in terms of the children that stand to lose so much. Thank you.
Sharon Omak.
Hi, my name's Sharon Omak, 25593 Old Lincoln Highway in Honey Creek. My background is that our daughter attended Crescent and then went to AL and graduated and then to Grinnell College and did well. A lot of the reason for that is because of the education that she had gotten. I have over 30 years of experience in economic development, most recently with the Federal Reserve. And in those endeavors, I tried to educate people about the importance of communities and having a strong community to live, work, and play. This repeated threat of school closure has stressed us as a community and has had long-term effects. I'd like to highlight an accurate history and some topics of economic sense and true commitment and equity. The school district shows Crescent Elementary expenditures over $900,000 the past year. Non-personnel costs, I'm referring to the sheet now that I gave you, is like $6,000. So if you look at that sheet, and most of the staff were supposed to be retaining their jobs in the district, so the only cost saving would be $413,000 a year. However, if Crescent closes, the busing cost would be $670,000, which would mean a net loss every year of $257,000. It would be cheaper to bus 40 students in than ship 67 students out. Over time, the district has shrunk the school boundaries to form College View and to serve Lewis and Clark. Additionally, the Underwood School District boundary is only a quarter mile from the school, so we have to offset these issues, and it takes time. Also, it's unfair to judge the school at this time. All elementary schools, as was mentioned, lost students due to COVID, not just Crescent. Additionally, Crescent has had a major flood in 2019. We didn't even get on the school map until 2018. So we need a little longer-term commitment to get through these cycles. The Crescent community has a true commitment to our school as the center of our community. We're a rural area, and the school is an important asset. I would hope that the board would consider the school as an asset rather than a liability, because smaller schools have different values and outcomes, and that diversity is healthy for the district. As you can see from the numbers that are listed, Crescent has a strong tax valuation base. In fact, it went up 35% in the last 5 years. And we contribute over $1.1 million annually to the Crescent School District. And if our expenditures are $900,000, then we have a surplus every year of $229,000 appropriated through the school district. Do you think any other elementary school area covers their costs? We have Lewis and Clark at $4 million. And College View at $6.5 million. Crescent has had inequitable treatment in the past. Besides the threat of closures, where the elementary school already noted that we didn't have a pre-K. As of 2017, the district committed to form Crescent as a science magnet school, and after 2 years, no notice was given to the community, and the effort was dropped. The district committed to having administrators who would serve longer term for stability. In the last 5 years, we've had 3 different principals, and this affects teacher retention and professional development. Alternately, Crescent has shown a true commitment to the school. We have had Crescent volunteers teach after-school programs. In 2018, we had 7 different programs, and we had 20 kids at each of those classes. We have volunteered money and time, obviously, for the playgrounds and the potential pre-K. As was mentioned, Crescent is continuing to be a growing community. The Golden Hills project is in its second phase. So we have 29 houses projected, 7 are occupied, 19 are under construction, and 1 is pending. This development is within a mile of the school and would be a natural feeder system to the school, and we have attracted many young families to the community. In the event the school would close, service businesses in town would be impacted as well as each resident. Statistics show that assessed valuations of land drop a minimum of 10% as a result of school closures. Indirect impacts would be felt as well. In summary, the district has not shown a true commitment to Crescent over the past couple years. Crescent fully supports its school. Direct and indirect financial impacts exceed $10 million a year. Please consider the value of the school and consider what you would like your legacy to be with respect to Crescent. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Richard Bott, or Bat?
Hello, my name is Richard Bott. I live at 111 West Welch with my family, wife and daughter. I was born and raised in Council Bluffs, went completely through the Council Bluffs school system. My wife's from Bellevue, don't hold it against her. We actually moved to Minnesota and lived there for almost a decade. My daughter was born there, and we chose to move back to this area to be closer to family. And in doing so, we chose Crescent because of the school. She was getting to the age where we were starting to actually have to plan for that. And she's supposed to be starting kindergarten in the fall. And like so many others have said, we received no notice that this was happening. We learned about it word of mouth a week or two before we even had our own town meeting about it. That was our whole point of moving to Crescent, was the school, about its numbers and being generally better than the Council Bluffs school system. The reason I'm so focused on that is because, having been in the system, one thing that people seem to not take into account when it comes to closing schools is the kids that are already in that school and having to move. And unfortunately, no two schools in a district are the same. And I know this from personal experience. It happened to me as a child. My parents made a decision to move, and in doing so, I moved middle of fourth grade year, and going from one school in Council Bluffs system to another, I got behind, specifically in math. I moved to the new school, started first day of class, had no idea what they were talking about. I never caught up, and I almost didn't graduate on time because of it. And I refused to let this happen to my child. And all of these kids, not only in Crescent, but in College View and in Lewis and Clark, they are going to have their classes diluted with more kids in their classes. And some of those children may be forced to move to other schools and have this happen to them. So this is a wider reaching issue that is not being, I really see being brought to the parents of these other schools and their children's well-being. And I don't want to have it happen to anyone else. So I wanted to bring this issue to light to all of you and wanted you to consider that in your decision. And that is all I have. Thank you for your time.
Jessica Urban.
Hi, thank you for having me tonight. My husband and I and our two daughters moved to Crescent area about 2 years ago. We searched for several years to figure out where we were going to move, and we moved to the Crescent area because of its small community and rural school for our children. Crescent Elementary was a significant factor in our decision. We bought a farmstead and have since invested in improving our property, including building a geothermal greenhouse that we obviously can't take with us. Had we known the school was a risk, we would have likely moved to and invested in another small town. Last year, they would have probably started at Crescent, but there was no preschool for Greta, so we have our kindergarten tour on the 23rd of this month. Many students in our area are spread out and in rural communities and small towns. They're not living in urban areas like the other schools in your district. They don't have cul-de-sacs where they see other kids. The nearest kids to these kids might be, a quarter mile, a mile away. They don't see them every day. For our children, the school is their community. That's their community. Okay? Research shows that a smaller student-teacher ratio increases academic success. In addition, small rural schools build and support parent-teacher relationships and partnerships, which is imperative to successful learning. These ideals foster the goals that you, Mr. LaFurla, you state that you have for your own children, to be happy, well-adjusted, and to love learning. And I feel like Crescent brings that tenfold. Not only is Crescent Elementary School essential for our children's development, but it also brings together the population of Crescent. Like, look at this room right here. It gives us something to be proud of and to rally around. The relationships forged in family events lead to other community activities and help the community to thrive and grow. Mr. Peters, You believe that the strength of a community is directly related to the strength of a community's public education. We share that same outlook. The school is the glue that binds the town of Crescent. Crescent is on the cusp of something really exciting, and I don't know when the last time any of you have been there. Okay, it is the gateway to our area's unique attractions like Hitchcock, everything, Stanley Shack, the ski hill, Potawatomi County, having recently purchased Crescent Ski Area, with plans to extend the trails to Hitchcock, increases the desirability of our area. Improvements are also in the works for the city pool, park, playground, and Main Street. Please join Potawatomi County in supporting Crescent. There's too many good things happening. It's on the uptick. Just in the 2 years that we've been here, we've seen the development of new homes and an increase in young families moving to the Crescent area. Small town schools build pride and ownership in the community. The closure of Crescent Elementary will devastate the culture of Crescent. It will devastate the culture of Crescent. Mr. Tripp, you attended school in Trainer, a similar community. I urge you to ask yourself, what would Trainer be without its schools? I've been there. I've been there for a homecoming parade. I know what that looks like in Trainer, and that's what it feels like in Crescent. Along those same lines, Mrs. Myers, you founded Project Beautiful, fostering community pride. Think about what that means to a community like Crescent and how many lives this decision will affect. Crescent Elementary fosters community pride. I urge you to vote to keep Crescent Elementary School open, which is also a vote for the future of Crescent. Every month they have a pancake feed. This month's pancake feed is this Sunday. I urge you to come. It's open. It's 9 to 1. Come and see what our community is about. I urge you to come. Please to come. Thank you.
Is it Jan Lee? Did I read that correctly?
Hi, my name is Jan Lee. My address is 27826 185 Street, Honey Creek. All three of my boys went to Crescent. I think you should consider not closing the school because of the impact it would have on the town of Crescent. You know, I think people move to Crescent because of the small school. Crescent would lose all the young parents and their kids. And so that's all I have to say.
So that brings us to the end of the list of individuals who requested time this evening.
Hello, board members. My name is Carmela Hargens. I just think before we close on the idea of Crescent, that all of the Crescent community, the teachers, the staff, the parents, and everybody should get a huge round of applause for not only putting time and effort against work, being a mom, being a dad, everything. So I think all of them should deserve a huge round of applause before we close.
Sure. Yes. Go ahead.
I was going to ask if I would have permission from the board to use the remaining 2 minutes and 24 seconds that Mr. Blatt had left over from his speech.
Sure, go ahead.
And this is leading off from the part that I didn't get to say. Honestly, has anyone been up to visit Crescent to see what awesome students, staff, and school we have? We have made it this far, and we will continue to do so. What would I change about Crescent Elementary? Nothing. We need the district to truly make a more dedicated effort in making Crescent Elementary more successful. Because if you ask me what I would want to change at Crescent Elementary, nothing. It should never be Crescent Elementary or the community against the Council Bluffs School District, never. But here we are as a community put in this position, and I hope none of you ever have to feel how we do. I know you cannot please everyone, but you can do the right thing and vote yes in favor of keeping Crescent Elementary open, the heart of its community open. We as leaders make decisions. We have to at times take a look at ourselves and inside our team and ask what we can do better. What can we do to be a successful team? As in team, I mean all of the district with all of their schools and all of their communities. We have to ask ourselves if we are approaching things the right way. Board members, please remember, this is just a recommendation, not a requirement, not a mandate to close Crescent Elementary. The ripple effect of closing the school will be huge and felt by many others in many different ways. This is an opportunity to do better, to be better. You are not only the school's future, but the future of Crescent community. I do know that when it comes to budgeting, there will never be enough money. And with the possibilities of the uncertainty of the future, what about the what ifs? What if the what ifs that we get grants, we get money, we can succeed? If you vote no, you'll never know. You have to ask yourself, is this a want or a need? This is for sure a need. John F. Kennedy once said, one person can make a difference, and everyone should try. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll close the public participation and move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. LaFurla. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Mark Schultz to join me at the podium. Our first informational presentation this evening will be on the proposed boundary changes and closing of Crescent Elementary. This is a difficult topic that many school districts across the nation are having with the loss of student enrollment coming out of the pandemic, introduction of education savings accounts or vouchers, and open enrollment in many of our states. No superintendent, board, school, employees, or community want to have this conversation. Mr. Schultz has been a part of the work at Crescent since I arrived in 2017. So, Mr. Schultz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo, and hello, board.
Evening.
I'd like to provide an overview of the current challenge. Crescent Elementary has a capacity of about 140 students. There are currently 64 students that are enrolled on site. The school has experienced a steady decline in enrollment over the past 7 years. And despite joint efforts to promote Crescent and increase enrollment, many families continue to choose other options. So when the school board voted on Crescent 7 years ago, the community was concerned that the district didn't do enough to grow enrollment. During Dr. Murillo's first year, she came to me and said, you got to get out there and you got to work with that community and the school and try and increase enrollment. And so at the time, working with the principal and some representatives from the community, we created some action steps to implement over the past about 6 years. So I'm going to go over a few of those things that we've done. The first thing that I want to talk about is the Project Lead the Way program. We launched it at Crescent, and it was the only school in the system that had that program. And it's a STEM program that's focused on science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And all the students in the school had access to that. We ran that the 2016-17, 17 and 18 up until the pandemic. The problems that we had is that teachers that were trained when they left the school, we had to keep retraining, and you can't provide the program unless you have a teacher that is trained. So we would train teachers, and then they would advance and do some other things. We also ran into the pandemic that caused it to pause at that time. Another action step we did is we assigned a full-time principal to Crescent Prior to the beginning of Dr. Murillo's tenure with us, the principal was shared between two buildings. She thought it was very important that we had a principal on site daily at the school. A couple of reasons. One is to provide teachers with supervision, feedback, and coaching, but also to have that presence on site just for safety and to ensure students in the school are safe. So beginning with Dr. Murillo's tenure, we have a full-time principal on site. Another thing that principals would do, the first principal that was there when Dr. Murillo was here, we created a list of all the families that live in Crescent that didn't at the time attend the school, and she called them. She called each of those families and talked with them about why not Crescent? Why aren't you coming here? We have a great school. Please join us. She did that before kindergarten roundup for 2 consecutive years, and did that up until the pandemic, when I don't want to keep blaming that darn pandemic, but it was a thing, right? Another action step we did is we did partner with the Crescent Community School Alliance and really focused on some branding for the school to ensure that people knew the school was there and it was a viable school. We agree it's a great place and we want it to do well. We want it to grow. And so working with that group, it really helped us to just kind of connect, because they had boots on the ground. They lived there in the community. I didn't live in the community, they did. So it was important for us to talk and meet with them and really work together to do what we could do to grow enrollment at the school. Another thing you've heard about is preschool. We worked with that group, and we really wanted to put a preschool, a parent-paid preschool at Crescent, and we agreed to do that. We created an MOU that was agreed upon by us and the group, and what we did to get preschool is we held preschool screenings on site. We did that for 2 consecutive years. We needed to have at least 6 students to have a viable preschool program there, and we were unable to have that enough interest to do that. We could not get the 6 students interested, so we were not able to do preschool at that time. You probably remember the slogan, Choose Crescent. That was something that came out of that work. That was put on social media, on the marquee, Crescent Connection, really trying to get the word out there, Choose Crescent, please come to our school. It's a great school and we want to grow it. An action that we did to support the families that currently attended at the time, we worked with Kids and Company to provide before school and after school daycare. Prior to that time, that didn't exist on site. And that was something we thought could entice families if the location of the school, drop kids off early, get over to work, especially for those families that work in North Omaha. We thought it would be a great opportunity. So that's something that we put some effort into. We also added Virtual Academy and trying to pivot with pandemic times. And the Virtual Academy, we chose Crescent because we thought it would be a great opportunity to help increase their enrollment. It allowed us to eliminate combination classrooms by putting Virtual Academy there. Prior to that, we had kindergarten, first grade in one classroom, second and third, and then fourth and fifth, all in the same classroom. This allowed us to separate. We added some more staff. And we are super excited that it was an opportunity to provide some families' needs, even other beyond Crescent community throughout the state, because they could engage virtually in that school. It gave parents an option that were worried about the spread of COVID. And we are super excited that it would help increase the enrollment. Unfortunately, it didn't, and we only have 5 remaining students in Virtual Academy. And then something that's smaller but was still important for us to do, we invested a little bit in the infrastructure of the school. We added some paint on the outside. We made sure that the outside of the school said Council Bluffs Community Schools. We had a hunch that we didn't know if some families in that area knew that that was part of the Council Bluffs Community School District, because what you've heard is having Underwood District, about a quarter mile away. We wanted to make sure that they knew that this was their school and didn't attend or enroll in a different location. We also added some technology, some carpet, and wanted to make sure that the school was more updated there. Actually, before I go to the next slide, I do want to say, so we've done a lot of things to increase enrollment. And as I was preparing for this presentation tonight, maybe think about my presence at the school. I started there 6 years ago, and there are no staff members, no one in that school that still works there that I was working with 6 years ago. And that really kind of made me a little, bummed out quite a bit, because so much effort that we wanted to do to grow the school, and looking around, it's new. So I'm disappointed that the enrollment, or that these action steps didn't really make a big impact there. So next I want to talk about the enrollment of the school. So in the Crescent attendance area, there are 122 kindergarten through 5th grade students that live in that attendance area. Of those 122, 51 attend Crescent. 41 open enroll to other school districts outside the Council Bluffs Community Schools. And 30 attend other Council Bluffs Community Schools. So less than 50% of all kindergarten through 5th grade students that live in the Crescent community attend the school. The majority of families choose to attend other schools. So I want to talk about the enrollment a little bit. As you look at this slide, you'll see over the last 7 years that enrollment has declined. You can see that trend line trending downward. Our hope was the opposite. Now, if you look at that 2021 school year, that's a little bit of an outlier. That was during recovering from the pandemic. We called it the hybrid year. And students in our system for the first semester, half attended on site one day and attended remotely the next day. And so we alternated that. So half the students, we could lower class size. We didn't have as many students in all of our schools. Well, at the time, Crescent had combination classrooms, and we had teachers teaching 2 grade levels at the same time. We could not ask them to also teach students remotely. It was just very challenging at the time. And so we reassigned those students to other Council Bluffs schools to receive that remote instruction. So that's why it looks like there's a dip there. Now I'd like to talk about the class sizes. So at Crescent, the class sizes are the smallest in our district. No question about that. They're the smallest in our district. Their average class size is 11. And looking from left to right, the class sizes for other elementary schools in Council Bluffs, you have 22 at Bloomer, 23 at Carter Lake, 22 at College View. There's 11 there at Crescent that I just mentioned. There's 22 at Edison. There's 25 at Franklin and Hoover. Lewis and Clark has 19. And then Longfellow, Roosevelt, and Rue all have 23 students as their average class size. The 2 lowest general classes in our district are at Crescent. We have 8 students in their 5th grade classroom, and we have 9 in grade 2. So those are our 2 lowest. Our district average altogether is 22. So it's about half of that. So next I'd like to talk a little bit about the funding. This slide represents the amount of money that we spend per student in our schools. You'll notice in looking at that graph that there's a pretty large gap between Crescent and other elementary schools in our district. The cost per pupil at Crescent is just under $14,000. And the average cost per pupil at our other elementary schools is just a little over $9,000. So currently the district provides more than 40% more funding for students at Crescent than at other elementary schools. Although, however, the enrollments decreased, our investment in the school has continued. Later this evening, Dr. Murillo and Mr. Wilson will provide more information about our budget and spending. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the proposed boundary changes. So if you'll take a look at the map on the left there, that represents the current boundaries for Crescent, Lewis and Clark, and College View. Crescent is outlined, it's kind of highlighted in gray, and then you'll see Lewis and Clark is outlined in blue, and College View is outlined in red. Now the map on the right shows the proposed changes, and you'll see that larger blue area, that's redrawn. Those students would attend Lewis and Clark. And looking at the red there, that would be the new College View attendance area. There are many students in that newer red area that would attend College View that currently have a pretty long bus ride out to Crescent. They would have a significantly shorter commute to work if the boundaries were changed. Another thing about that, it's important to think about, that would help right-size the district and balance our students out. Another thing about the proposed boundary changes is that district transportation would be provided to Lewis and Clark or College View based on the home address. But if a family wanted to attend any other Council Bluffs elementary school, we would prioritize that transfer. But like our other in-district transfers, parents would have to provide that transportation. So you might be thinking about, well, with these proposed changes in boundaries, how is that going to impact the enrollment at Lewis and Clark and College View? Well, a couple things to think about. There'd be about 25-ish students attending each. Adding those students to those schools would have a very minor impact. Both schools are under capacity. Excuse me. With the addition of Crescent students, the average class size at Lewis and Clark and College View would go to 23-1. So 23 students per classroom. And our district goal is 24. So that would actually be a little bit under that. And Dean Wilson's taking care of me with some water. Thank you. Excuse me. I also want to say our district has a very comprehensive curriculum and materials that are embedded in every classroom throughout the entire system. Crescent, Lewis and Clark, College View, Bloomer, Carter Lake, everyone uses the same materials to teach the exact same curriculum. We have students that move between buildings frequently throughout the year, and going from one place to another place, they're within a day or so of the curriculum, they don't miss a beat. It's so important for us to have a curriculum that allows to meet the needs of all of our students that do have high mobility. And we do have that in our system. And so our curriculum, our teaching is designed to meet the needs so our students do not have that impact. I've got a quick story here. I was at one of our schools this year doing a math learning walk, and there was a student that was in this classroom that I was at. It was a third grade classroom, and the student transferred from a different school, and the math coach I was working with went to that other school, and she was working there the day before. And so this student, it was the first day, and they were doing a math lesson. And this student, first day of school, he saw that, the first day at the new school, he raised his hand and he had an answer, and he was super engaged in it, and he knew exactly what to do because it was the same thing that his school and class was doing the day before at a different school. So that's very important to us, and I know you might be thinking about that. What would the life be like for the student? But that's important for you to know. I wanted to tell you that. I have presented quite a bit of information there. I'm sure I went over 5 minutes. I didn't get timed, though. I know you have a lot of things to talk about as a board. So I'll thank you for listening.
Any questions or conversation from board members?
Yeah, I guess I'd start out, I guess for the public, I was in Chris's chair in 17. As everybody knows who came, that was a horrible discussion. Horrible we had to consider it at that time. It's horrible we have to consider it now. And I don't think anyone on the board, looks at this and doesn't see all of your kids or the community there and not feel that, right here in our hearts. I would say, I think it's a little bit tough to say that our kids can move around a lot and do well. Our highest mobility schools usually are poorest performing. I don't think we don't try to help those kids, but I know that that's an issue. I do have some questions around kind of a lot of things. I guess I would say for the public, when this first came up, we were talking about, hey, we have this budget issue now. We just got information February, I believe, on where the state was, and all this came together very fast. I know as a board, it came together very fast. And we've known about it, I feel like about maybe a week before the community did, and maybe, I don't even know. This came at us quick. So what was it that threw this on the radar that we can share here, just as far as, I've seen the costs here, but a lot of our discussion was around, here's a potential savings of this much, and it affects 60 kids, not a Crescent community, but 60 kids. And here's other programs and things we do that affect 500 kids or 900 kids. I feel like that would be at least fair to talk about as a board. If someone has thoughts on that, or if you can share anything on that, about how we got here.
Okay, Mr. Arthur, we met about 3 times as a board and discussed the budgets and the budget proposals.
Yep.
And the budget and starting to look at what was coming down the road, knowing that the ESSER dollars were coming to a close, that had been really what carried us over. Because when the pandemic hit, we lost about 434 students. We recovered 18 or 19 one year and 17 the next. So we're still net negative 398. And if you take that times $7,500, we're close to $3 million short right there off of enrollment that occurred from when the pandemic hit to where we are now. So we allowed the ESSER dollars to carry us, to bridge it, hoping that enrollment would rebound and the students would come back. And what we found was when the pandemic hit, people lost their jobs, and we can track almost every student, but 49 of them, because schools requested, and they went all over Iowa and across the border. Just to Omaha alone, we lost 167. And that's because we send the school records to where they went. And then on top of not having new homes or any type of growth in Council Bluffs, we know that we're still struggling to build homes anywhere except for in the Lewis Central District. That's where it's rapidly growing. So we knew that this was coming, and so as a team, we began to look at our budget back before Thanksgiving in November, because we didn't know what the state would allow us as new funding, but we did know that we had to look at what our current costs were and what would be the increases, especially with inflation. So what would be the cost of the contracts? What would be the cost of utilities? What would be the cost of busing and gasoline? And what would be the cost of, and I can just keep going down the list. We begin to look at what would be that index growth of at least 2% or more. And then what were we going to be able to do? What contracts do we have in place that the index wouldn't increase? And what would that look like over the next 2 years? So that's where we begin to look at where the shortfalls. I started inside, which I'll show in the budget presentation. Of the 10, 11 cost-saving measures, we're doing 8 at the district level. I am trying to stay away from classrooms and trying to not impact the learning or touching where students are. But that's where the conversation started. And as we began to look at how do we find $3.8 million, we had to look at the district as a whole. And that's where the conversation started.
I appreciate that. And I know this is not an easy thing, even for your teams to have to try to find savings, right? Are there services at Crescent that we struggle to provide currently, given how it's staffed? I know we especially changed to add a full-time principal to get away from the combined classrooms to try to address issues we were having, but are there still like services we struggle to have there?
Yeah, there's certain things that we can just start off with, the specials classes, counselors, the tag services. All other schools may have those every day. They may get it one time a week, and that's it. And so that's where we're talking about when we talk about support schedules. And if I'm going down a road that I need my team to say, let me give you exactly where you should be, that's the piece where we're worried about is they're receiving something just once a week, where other schools are receiving it more than once a week.
Do we have any idea on how many students right now do we think are going to pre-K elsewhere? Going downward for pre-K, going elsewhere, do we have an idea on that?
Clarify for me on pre-K.
Just students who are going elsewhere for pre-K reasons. I mean, I know we had a small limited number that were coming here.
Yeah.
They don't have to open and roll out.
No.
Right, so we don't have an idea.
So there's really no way to know.
Okay.
No.
And, yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you that Mr. Schultz and Dr. Matthews did a lot of work, and I appreciate the team that worked with us, because we had a team from Crescent that met with us monthly, and we tried for several years to try to develop, we found a classroom, then we were looking for classroom furniture. We couldn't get, right now we offer screening just at certain places. And I know in working closely with one of the community members, they asked, could we bring the screening to Crescent because the families wouldn't come in? And we took the screening out to Crescent so that we could then try to at least get 7 students and do a sliding scale. And the most that we ever really secured was 3, and that would commit. And so it was something that we were working hard on, and we just couldn't get the commitment from the community or the families in the community to come to the preschool.
Okay, I'll let others ask questions.
I just wanted to mention a couple of things about the budget cuts. Ms. Mearswa, she pleaded for us to, just be very careful with the cuts that we're making. And there isn't a person up here who wants to do anything other than to keep our children isolated from these cost savings as much as possible. And I know 133 million is a lot of money, but cutting 4 million is a very challenging task. I think, Mr. Shea, you mentioned that 1 million being a percent of that cut. Well, when we've received state funding increases over the last 12 years that average under 2%, our schools are stretched extremely thin. These are not easy decisions to make. And, we want to, I personally am, very concerned about, eliminating teacher positions. Nobody wants to do that. But when 80% of your expense is payroll, that's nearly impossible to do. This is a difficult conversation to have. There's been a lot of comments about, the district not doing enough for Crescent. That's difficult for me to hear because, I was on this board along with Mr. Arthur and Mr. Kozier in 2017 when we voted to keep Crescent open. And nobody would know this, but, I personally have been, very committed to doing everything we can for that community. So it's challenging for me personally to hear that. But I know that before I joined the board, that the board had to close several elementary schools that had greater enrollment than Crescent, and those decisions were very difficult to do. And all the while, the board maintained Crescent. So I understand where the Crescent community is coming from, but I do want you to know that there have been lots of people fighting for Crescent. And we don't want to do this. Nobody wants to have this conversation. We have done a lot to keep Crescent open. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't have any questions or anything just yet, but I think it's important for me to say that and for the community to hear that.
Chris, I think you're right about, when closure of Walnut Grove was traumatic for the community that's there. The closed, Pusey closed, different schools, not different than many communities across Iowa where they're having to close schools or merge towns or all that. But you're right, when Crescent was brought up in those things, it wasn't that Crescent was uniquely targeted. It was about trying to save budgets and where could you consolidate schools, I think was a lot of that discussion. And you're correct in saying that we've always, I think, fought for Crescent. So.
I'd just like to piggyback, Chris, what you talked about, that and we've talked about this. We are here because of the decisions that have been made up in Des Moines. Let's make no qualms about it, right? This is why we're here. And I urge everybody that's here that has reached out to us to also reach out to your state legislatures, your state senators and your state congresspeople. There's a legislative coffee on this Saturday at Wilson Junior High this Saturday. So I hope you guys go out and show your support and tell them what their decisions have done to our communities. There's more bills that are potentially going to be passed that will have a larger effect, potentially have a larger effect on our communities. Their decisions have an impact on us. And they normally meet, once a month throughout the legislative system. Very oddly, they're only meeting once this session for a legislative coffee that's open to the public. It is a tough decision. One of the questions that, and I apologize, I took a lot of notes while everybody was speaking. But one of the topics was the Promise to Succeed ceremonies being separate for Crescent and not being out at Iowa Western with everybody else. Can you talk just a little bit as to why that happens?
I know I asked Mr. Schultz about it. Go ahead. And because that was the question I also had. And I was told it was a building level decision, but I'd like Mr. Schultz to share.
Yeah, the principal reached out to the families and they decided and they agreed that they wanted to just keep it on site at the school. But we are definitely entertained doing it at Iowa Western.
Do they reach out every year, or was it just made once and then we just kind of went with it?
Yeah, we've done it twice.
Twice, right.
Yes, but we did ask both times.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Schroeder.
Okay, perfect.
I actually, too, had a question possibly for Mark or possibly for Dr. Murillo. So a couple times in the presentation it was brought up that for a few years there was some outreach to families who didn't have students that were enrolled. If the data for this isn't available, I completely understand, but did we get responses from those folks? And if so, were there any patterns as far as to those responses?
Yes, I'll let Mr. Schultz answer that, because I believe that started with Mariah, where we really went after trying to welcome people back. Yeah.
Yes, actually, prior to Mrs. Schroeder, Mrs. Janine Crane was the principal, and she was the one that launched it. And she kept a call log and just some notes. So the data is her writing things down. As far as were there themes, many just said, we're happy where we are. Our kids already have friends, and moving schools would be too much for them. So that's the thing.
Dr. Marlowe, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit further about not only the enrollment of Crescent students at the elementary school, but that transition into our middle school and high schools.
That's another thing that we worked really, really hard on, and I know Mr. Schultz did last year with our middle school principal, is when the students leave as fifth graders, it's, we have very few that will continue on to Kern. Most of our students that are there end up either transferring out to Underwood or to Tri-Center. And so that is another piece that we've really worked hard on, bringing our students and our principal out, our counselors out, and then having time for them to come to the middle school. But we really struggled to retain fifth grade into sixth grade.
And again, do we know what the reason would be why they're not continuing on and being dedicated to the Council Bluffs Community School District?
Yeah. I don't know if Mr. Hamilton would have any of that data as to why they don't continue in sixth grade, or Mr. Schultz, if you know. I know that just afterwards, in talking with students, fifth grade, they will tell me where they're going next year at the Promise to Succeed.
Yeah, I know anecdotally, so they have, I think a lot of it, there's smaller schools are going to, and going to Kern is a large school at 12, was there 900 kids there, 1,000 kids there? And that's a big change for a lot of those, and there's families who go, that they can then take the bus into Underwood or go over to Tri-Center. But that's a consistent theme I think I've heard.
And that's understandable. I mean, and I understand why, you'd want to retain that small school feeling in middle school and high school. But that's also what makes this so challenging, because, we do have middle schools and high school to support here. It's not just a K-5 district.
Dr. Marlowe, can you talk a little bit about our proposal to lease the school back so we don't have an empty, if there's no decision been made, but if there is, a decision to close it, that we want to see the community continue to grow and the opportunity to look at enrollments or kids K through 12 coming into the community and a potential reopen if we had to close.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. When I talked with the board a little bit about this concern of enrollment decreasing and the budget that we were facing, one of the things that is I watched prior to coming in 2017 to Crescent, I felt like I knew that it's important to have a school. And I had been a part of a district that had closed several buildings, and I know how tough it is. This is not something that we wanted to engage in. So I thought another good way to continue to have a place for the Crescent community to come together, to stay a community, to have time together was, and it was not offered in the first time, was to offer Crescent Elementary as a community center for that community, so that there was a place for the students to come back together and have time. And I know that we've done a really good job. I know that Ms. Schroeder and Ms. Crane and now Devin has done a great job of having picnics and things like that for gathering. So I know the outside was being used, but there's a real need also in the community to have a place to gather inside and to be able to have meetings and to be able to, because we've had people ask to rent the building and use it for like baby showers and things like that. And so I thought, instead of us mothballing a building with the hopes that we would grow, that maybe we could do something in return of allowing that to be a community center. It is not something that, I know it's not the best option, but it is better than us just mothballing a building and closing it. And I thought it would be a nice gesture. So when I did meet with the mayor, that was a proposal that I offered. And the board, when I spoke with the board about it, I was very glad to hear that you guys were in favor of not just closing the building, but allowing the building to be used for that community.
There was mention about the tax revenue being enough to support the school in its entirety, but can you comment on the fact that it's actually spread across the middle school and the high school, not just the elementary?
The tax base that comes in that is allocated for the schools is something that goes into the general funds in which we build our budget on for every school. And Crescent would be the Crescent Elementary that would feed into Kern Middle School that would also need to feed into AL, just as Hoover would feed into Kern Middle School and to AL, just as Lewis and Clark would, or that Franklin would feed into Wilson and then into. So all of the tax dollars not only goes for an elementary school, but it goes for the feeder pattern to the middle school and the high school.
Dr. Murillo, there's a few questions about the cost savings. And so I just want to make sure that we clear up confusion about, if the personnel cost at the building is $600,000, how we're realizing a cost saving if the building were to close.
Yeah, one thing that the teachers that are taking or looking at positions as we met with them, and I know there was concern about us meeting with the staff, but we felt like, and Mr. Milborn, who oversees my HR department, kind of took out some options for teachers, because the first thing you say is, what about my job, right? And so we're not adding more staff inside the Council Bluffs schools. These teachers were able to look at what open positions are currently, and we're not filling those positions until a decision has been made. So those were positions that are there that they are open that we need to hire for. So they're not new positions or more positions in a school. They are vacant positions that are sitting there. So there is no additional cost. So when that cost of closing a building would happen, those teachers would fill vacant positions. So it would already be a budgeted position. It would not be a new or a extra position we're putting in a school. So that's why there's a cost savings.
Are there any questions or comments from the board or discussion that you'd like to have?
Just one item. When we look at the cost per student at Crescent, roughly being the $4,400 more than the average school, just to put it in perspective, if we could fund all students at the same level that we do Crescent, it would add additional $38.6 million to the budget. Or, I mean, that we would be looking for, $38.6 million if we were funding at that 13,800. So we do have to deal with equity. I mean, I understand. I mean, I know the difference between equity and equal, and they're different. But this is not equitable for those students that have 25 students in the classroom that their fellow students only have 8 or 9 in the same grade level. So there's a great disparity between those students that are in the Franklin school boundaries compared to where they have 25 students in a class compared to the 11. It's definitely an equity issue that I see. And that'd be great if we could fund every student. Wouldn't it be wonderful that we funded every student at $4,400 more? Look at the opportunities that we would provide for them. But we can't. We're limited to what the state says that we can spend. And right now, we're in a position where we have to right-size the district, not just one school. Unfortunate as it is, a major part of it, because it affects them the most, but we as a board have to make the decision on behalf of all students. And it's troubling, it's hard. I was there in 2006 in the fire. I was there. I was on the school board. We went through some hard times. Some tough decisions, tough conversations that we had to deal with. And at that time, do we rebuild the school? And the board voted, yes, we will rebuild the school. That is our commitment to the community, that we will rebuild this school.
So, question for you. With Bott County, It is, I mean, it's a great point with Pot County investing in that area and some of the maybe the growth that might show, or at least show their investment in the area. Do we know, I mean, have we had the conversation with Pot County about planned investments in the community planned in that area?
The only couple of conversations I've had with the mayor of Crescent and the mayor of, and then I've also had with the county supervisor, there does seem to be one more subdivision that they're considering. That's why when we talk with them about converting this to a community center and doing a lease for maybe 7 years and then evaluating to see if the town would have enough students that they'd like to reopen the building, is something that the growth seems to be slow. And I do know that the subdivisions were talked about when I arrived 5 years ago. And so still working through that. I know there's some infrastructure that needs to happen that's very costly. And I do think it'll make that progress and get there someday.
So two questions that kind of come to my mind, right, is especially with the new subdivisions. And these two questions are probably going to be takeaway questions, right? So I'm not looking for an answer right now. But how many kids that are in the two new Golden Hills subdivision go to Crescent? Right? Because if they're building, but none of them have kids in school age, that is really not something that's looking at us, right? And I believe that the cost of those homes are somewhere over $400,000, $450,000, I believe, from driving through that and looking at the sign.
And what was your second question?
My second question then would be, I was not on the board the last time that we went through this in 2017, but I did go back and watch the video. And there was some tough conversations there about we need more time, we need more time, we need more time. How much time is it when we say, if this is the fourth round and our numbers continue to decrease, when do we say we've done enough? And if the kids are not staying with us from elementary into junior high and high school, it's difficult. It's really difficult to Dave's point, the equity, right? And to look at it from an equitable standpoint. So those are the two questions right now that are wrestling in my head.
I agree with you, Ms. Shudak, and that's the question that when I worked with Mark when I arrived, the kindergartners that started the year I arrived are graduating this year from Crescent. And and what I kept hearing was, they're just going to give us 2 years. And I kept telling the committee, we're going to invest more than 2 years. Well, you're just going to give me 3. I said, no, we're going to invest in you, and this is what we're doing, and it's open. And I said, what does it take to one of the community members to help them believe that if they'll come back to the school, support the school in their community, that we will continue to leave it open? I don't know what it would take, and I am concerned that some, like a smaller school district, even though the elementary school district in one of those districts is larger than the elementary school that we have. And no, it's their elementary. Elementary is bigger than Lewis and Clark. So I don't know how much time, because it was about, if you guys left it open in 2017, we will grow it. And we haven't been able to grow it.
Well, a lot of the discussion at that time was also around the lack of really real estate within Council Bluffs, which was mentioned earlier, and the fact that there was an opportunity to grow, the city, the district, everything by trying to partner, I don't think that it's, obviously, it was flooding before, and then it was, fire before that, and then it was, and now we've had pandemic, flooding after, and more pandemic. So I feel like it's been a sequence of events that have been probably hard for any town to face, right? Honestly. And that's, I think the hard part for us, though, is it is hard when you see, I think there was 115 or 17 students in 2016. It went to 85, it went to 75, and it just kept going down, right? And now to be at 65, I understand that everyone's here because they love Crescent. But it seems like there's people there who are just happy to go elsewhere. But maybe it's not, maybe those aren't the students right there in Crescent. Maybe the students are on the boundaries of the districts, and it's convenient to go over there. I have kids over there already. I like a small district, so I just send all my kids to Underwood or Tri-Center. You know, if I want a small district, I go to Tri-Center. And so I think it's, you know, I don't think we're considering, or I think we're thinking all the same thoughts you guys think about all these, you know, the fears and the effect it could have on a small town. I think that's where this concept of a community center actually seemed intelligent, I guess, if it could be embraced, you know. But I mean, that's kind of, I think, where that thinking has come from. But I know that, I mean, I would like to know how many homes are being built, how many, you know, if the average price of the home is, say, $350 in a 6-7% interest rate market, is that going to get families in there? You know, is that, I mean, we know a lot of families that we know that go to other schools that are in Crescent boundaries because they work and live further this way. You know, they work and live in Omaha, so it's convenient for them to drop the kids on the way. And those, you know, students, you know, I think of a couple I know that go to Hoover, love Hoover. It's got a ton of kids in their classrooms. And they love it there. And it's probably our top school right now, by far. And so that they're kind of turning the head on the small classroom size, you know. So I think there's just a lot that's being thought, but I would love to know more about, you know, kind of those things of what is going on there. Projections, if the county's putting money in their projections, you know, all that, because I think those things are valuable in this discussion when we're trying to balance also the growth of an area in between here and there that's not Lewis Central. No, that's all.
A few things have been mentioned about equity tonight, and you know, from a student's perspective, the services that we're able to provide and classroom sizes, you know, that's an equity consideration. But also for our teachers, you know, we have teachers at school, kindergarten teachers that have class sizes of 30 and 32, you know, and so we have to think about the equity of our teachers too. That's part of the consideration. But there was a couple of questions or maybe comments about the school district not offering to bus students from from other elementary schools into Crescent, and that's another equity issue. We don't do that. We couldn't afford to do that for everybody that wanted that service in the school district, even if we wanted to. But we can't from equity standpoint. That's the reason why we can't do that. We can't do it for all other students. So that's at least part of the reason for that. And I just wanted to mention that. I'm sorry?
And we dropped it once already for the Kitchener students, my understanding. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yeah. We've expanded the Crescent boundary
Attendance area.
Twice since I've been on the board. Yes, we have. We have expanded the school boundary to include more students, and yet those students that were included in that boundary chose to open into a different school.
I feel like we went through, you know, there was a handout that was given of some of the expenditures, and it does seem like there's a bit of a difference as far as the budget that we have. You know, someone mentioned, you know, 130 million, and that sounds like, you know, a big pool, but there are different funds that we have to be able to use, and those funds have restrictions and I feel like that part is missing from the conversation. I know that's a very weedy subject that is very hard to get into. Can we briefly talk about, and if this is in the budget, I know another agenda item is the budget, but if we could briefly talk about some of the restrictions that are put on the general fund and some of the other funds, I think that would be very helpful.
Sure. Are you going into the budget presentation?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going.
No. So thank you, Mr. Peters. Yeah, so what ends up happening is that we have federal and state grants that are given to us that are included in the general fund. And there are restrictions on how we can use that money. So we just can't, so for instance, one item that is very obvious is special education dollars. We have to use that for students who have IEPs, and there are certain restrictions around how we can use that money. So I cannot, nor can anybody else in the state, take special education dollars and fund just general teachers that are in the school. Same thing, we also have grants for TAG, Talented and Gifted. We have things for dropout prevention. We have grants for Title I. There's only certain schools that are considered Title I schools, and we have to use the money in those schools. Title II, Title IV, whatever. So there is a pool of money that is restricted on how we can use it. We just can't use it for anything general. I think sometimes the public may not quite understand that, especially if you haven't been in government before. I know that somebody asked me once, well, you got all this bond money, why don't you use that? Because it's illegal. We can only use bond money for the purpose that the voters intended it to be. So yes, there are restrictions, and we have to honor those restrictions by law, and we get audited on that every year.
Mr. Wilson, and just, for the general public that's watching, right? That's also the same thing, because I've seen comments or people have made comments to me directly, well, you're doing all this construction, or you're doing these upgrades, or you're doing that. It's different funds that can be used for different things. So
Correct.
we have to abide by what the state says we can use those funds for those
That's
different
correct.
pools.
Right, and the federal government as well, the feds on their grants have specific rules that we get audited on every year.
And that was part of, we talked a little bit about ESSER funds. For the general public, that was the emergency relief fund, that funding that came from the federal government during COVID. And that's part of why many of these cost-saving measures, even though they were results of the pandemic, haven't had to take effect until now, because we used all the ESSER funds.
We were able to use some of those dollars to help us manage the budget. And we could, by law, do that. But there was a significant portion of that money that had to be used for COVID mitigation. So things like HVAC systems, things like filtration systems for air, new doors and windows, things like that we had to use the money for. In fact, the COB, the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, did a study just recently, and they found that they took a sample of like 35 school districts around the United States, and they found $280 million of money that was not spent in accordance to the rules that the feds had set up. I make sure that that's not what we do. Okay?
Also, Mr. Wilson, the renovations we're doing to Canesville, that
Yes.
comes out of dollars that are set for the renovation. And then for our early learning center, we had, we raised private funds, and we had some public funds, but it's always dollars that are set aside if we use our district dollars
Right.
for facilities.
Roughly 68% of the money raised for the Early Learning Center was private dollars that we had raised, that people donated or foundations donated. The other roughly $5 million will come out of our capital project funds, which we can only use for capital projects. We can't move it over to the general fund by law.
Thank you. Board members, any other conversation, discussion, questions?
Not at this time.
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for their comments, their coming out. It is a tough, it's tough on both sides, right? So I just thank everybody for coming, showing up, sharing your opinions, your thoughts, and we'll be taking everything into consideration.
Thank you. And we will have a resolution coming up later to set a public hearing on Crescent. I guess we'll move on to the budget report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. LaFleur. For our second presentation tonight, I'm going to ask Mr. Wilson to join me at the podium. Mr. Wilson and I will be presenting an overview of the 23-24 school year budget. Mr. Wilson will give you an overview of our state aid and over the past 10 to 5 years and our enrollment. And then I'll provide an overview of the cost-saving measures that we've identified to ensure that the district is financially stable. So, Mr. Wilson?
Did you want to?
Oh, yes,
talk
that's
about
right,
this
I'm
slide
sorry.
first?
As we began to look at this budget considerations, this is really where we started back before Thanksgiving. We really looked at how the ESSER dollars help bridge the gap, but you've seen in many articles in many different papers and periodicals that the ESSER dollars, a cliff was coming. Districts were using the ESSER dollars to bridge the gap between the inadequate state funding and also enrollment drops that they were experiencing. Then we also looked at the small increases the state was funding us through the SSA and how that those costs were not really covering the salaries and the operating expenses. And then we knew with what the governor, the legislators passed for the governor, the uncertainty of the impact of the ESAs and how that would have an impact on our enrollment and revenue. And then lastly, a couple of things that we're still watching that Ms. Ostrowski will talk about in the legislative updates is the open enrollment transportation. And then Dean is really going to touch on the spending authority restrictions and where we need to stay. So, Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. This graph shows the certified enrollment since the 2016-17 year to the 23-24 year. Now, what this slide indicates is the enrollment change by year, and I have in the blue boxes the increase or decrease from the prior year. Since 2016-17, we have lost 402 students, most of which occurred during the 2021 year and the 21-22 year from the pandemic. What we have found across Iowa is that large urban districts are running into the same issue. For instance, Des Moines lost 1,000 students. Now, if you multiply that times about 7,500, that's 7.5 million coming out of their budget, and I know that they're making budget cuts along with other school districts because of this. The green line at the top of the bars there is the trend line over the same period. So if you take the data points and you basically average it out, is it going up or going down? And our enrollment is slipping there. What we do is enrollment is certified in October of every year, and then that now count is used for funding in the next year. So as an example, we took an enrollment count in October of 2022, and that will be used to fund us for 23-24. So that's how that works in the state. In this table right here, what I did is on the left was the additional funding the Council Bluffs Community School District received in either additional funds from the prior year or cuts from the prior year. And what's on the right is the state supplemental aid that that the legislature passed for the school district. So the way that this works is, if your enrollment from year A to year B is the same, and the legislature gives you a 3% increase, you will get 3% more money. But if your enrollment has dropped or if enrollment has gone up, you'll get either less or more than that, okay? So the SSA over the last 5 years was an average of 2.05%. So if you average the 5 years that the state had approved, they gave us an average of 2.05%. And I think all of us could appreciate that the inflation rate, even before what we're experiencing now, was probably 3-ish, okay? Our district, because of enrollment reductions, actually received less than 1% of new funding every year, on average. Now, if you look in the 2020 year and the 2023 year, and the 2023 is the current year that we're in, we actually had a reduction in state aid of roughly $184,000 that we could use that's not encumbered for categorical purposes. So it's general money that we can use to provide raises, to pay for increased costs of utilities, maintenance, or whatever. You will notice that the additional funding over the last 5 years, you add it all up, the district received roughly about $2.9 million, or about $600,000 average per year, which is paltry, okay? As a comparative to this, our benefits alone in that 5-year period of time went up $3.2 million. So the benefits alone consumed all of that plus more. That doesn't include raises, that doesn't include increases in utility costs, maintenance, transportation for students, whatever. Simply stated, state revenues are not keeping pace with inflation, which the Wall Street Journal reported is about 6.4% as of recent times. It may be less or more based on a regional area, but that's the national right now, 6.4%. We use federal ESSER dollars, as we mentioned earlier, that assisted the district in bridging the gap of funding while maintaining educational services. And we did anticipate that these 400 students would come back. I mean, why wouldn't you, right? You would think, well, some of them are being homeschooled or some of them may not be attending school, so we figured that they would come back. Sadly, that did not happen, and school districts around the United States have found that trend. In fact, I think I read that there's over 1 million students that have not come back nationwide. That's pretty frightening. You know, where are these kids going, and what about the education of these students over the years? The next two slides will display the same information more in a graphical format. I think will help out. So this shows the state supplemental aid increase in the blue dots since 2000. It was a high of, the highest was 4%. You'll notice that in 2012, that's when the state had to do an across-the-board cut. And they basically told school districts in the middle of the year, you're not getting any money this year. You got to deal with it. And I know Mr. Kazire was on the board. And our spending authority went from double digits down to, I think, 1.8%. And that's why the spending authority thing is so important. Spending authority is a calculated number. It's not a pot of money. It's not cash somewhere. It's a calculated number that says based on your enrollment and a number of other financial factors, you have to have a spending authority of X percent, that we recommend that you have a spending authority of X percent of your expenditures. The Department of Education, the Iowa Association of School Boards, and our board has all said that they want a spending, unspent authority of about 7 to 12%. So if we have emergencies, that's a problem, okay, that we can weather. You could have $100 million in the bank. If your spending authority is 0, you can't spend a dime of it legally. And unfortunately, Davenport Schools ran into this 2 years ago. Davenport said, we've got this cash, our taxpayers wants to spend it, state, to heck with you. Well, what ended up happening is the state came in and they fired the superintendent, and they put the board on notice that you do this again, we're going to hit you with civil penalties. And now Davenport has to cut about $5 to $8 million out of their budget. Okay? This next slide shows in the blue the actual SSA, or the state increase that the legislature provided. However, the red shows what our school district received. Okay? So as you can see there, we have gone negative in 2020 and 2023 in terms of new funding compared to the prior year, and our costs go up. There was a couple years ago, Mr. Hansen spoke earlier, that we could only settle on a 1% raise for staff. And as hard as teachers work and the staff works around here, I thought that was a tragedy, but that's all we could afford. Okay? Again, revenues are not keeping pace with expenditures, and now what we need to do is figure out how to bridge the gap. And that's what Dr. Morrill is going to talk about in a moment. What we have here is these are the projected revenues and expenditures for the 23-24 year, the year coming up. We're looking at a deficit of about $2.7 million. We believe our spending authority, because of the way the state calculates certain things, is going to drop another $1 million. That's where we're coming up, that we need to cut roughly $3.9 million out of our budget this year. And then we'll have to talk about next year later. So how do we close the gap?
Question real quick, Dr. Ruff. Mr. Wilson, with this 3.875, did you say where our spending authority would end up if we were to?
Yeah, so our spending authority at the end of June of 2022 was roughly 8.6%. So it's in a good range. Because of what's going on this year, we think it's going to fall below the 7% floor that the board has asked us to maintain. I think it'll be somewhere between 6.7 and 7.1 or 7.2. It's just hard to know until we get
with these savings.
Oh, with these savings? Oh, I'm sorry. With these savings, we think it'll just stay steady.
Stay, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that's what we're trying to work through with the cost-saving measures. So when we think about the cost-saving measures, the first 8 that I'm going to talk about is what we're looking to do at the district level. Trying to really work hard to keep any of the budget cuts from really touching the classroom as much as possible. So some of the areas that we looked at is, right now currently, we have our technology and Chromebook replacement is on a 3-year cycle. So by pushing it out to a 4-year cycle, we can save roughly about $260,000. And that's one thing we think that we can do and manage and be able to do our own repairs in-house and be able to do that. Of course, we'll evaluate next year to see how that goes, what it looks like. But we really believe that's a good cost-saving measure. We also are going to transfer the technology and facility repair costs out of the district's general operating fund into an insurance policy. This is something Mr. Wilson, in the state meeting with the CFOs, ran across the insurance policy. And by doing that, we think we can save roughly around $200,000 by moving to this policy. And this will save us some significant dollars there. And then reorganizing facilities, custodial, and maintenance department, and the use of our vendors. We're going to really take a really strong look. We've already done some things to move out a couple of vendors, and we won't be using those. We'll be doing all the work in-house. And then through attrition, we're going to reduce some of the positions that are currently open. When you look at summer school, we're going to reduce the number of days while still serving the same number of students. We're just going to reduce, like in our zoo program for our middle school, going from 3 weeks to 2 weeks, and our LIFT program for our students that are transitioning into high school, going from 2 weeks to 3 weeks to 2 weeks. That will save us a really good sum of money, a little over $150,000. When you look at discontinuing the SAM project, that really was a great time tracker. It really helped us really concise and look at how many minutes our principals were spending on instruction, what they were doing with their day. We're still going to keep kind of something similar to the SAM model, but it will be something we bring in-house, saving the dollars it would take to be a part of this project, and that will save us right around a little over $40,000. Reducing the number of district-level administrators and support personnel is another area that we're doing at this level in ESC. And then adjusting the current structure of the TLC and how the funding for the stipends are allocated. When we look at the secondary level, we are looking at some cost-saving measures, transitioning away from the IB program at the middle school. By not staying part of that project, we'll save a little over $200,000. And then the one key piece that really will save us some one-time dollars is in that IB program, you have to recertify every 2 years. So the professional development for that recertification is about $680,000 a year to get all of our teachers back recertified. So that's a really good cost savings for us. And then reduce the total number of graduation coaches and therapists is another area. We're doing that through attrition. We will still have, let me get my numbers in my head to pop up. We will still have 10 social workers and 7 therapists. I get that right, Mr. Peters? Yes. And so that's just at the elementary level that we will keep in place, and then we'll still have our middle school and our high school. Now at the elementary level, the consideration to changing the elementary boundaries to reassign Crescent student area students to either Lewis and Clark or College View and close elementary is one cost-saving measures that we've asked. And then reorganizing classroom schedules for the consistency to deliver a consistent delivery of elementary special classes of art, music, PE, as well as counseling. That is another cost-saving measure that we are looking at. And really want to say I'm very appreciative of the specials teachers that have worked with us through this process, and the work we're doing to offer that consistent delivery of not only that schedule into the specials, but also allowing our classrooms to have a consistent schedule every day. And very thankful for the work that was done around that. And I know that was something that I believe we have about 168 elementary teachers, and providing them with that every day, that consistent physical education, PE, art, and counseling as well, music. So a little discussion around a quick overview of the budget.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion?
You kind of mentioned this as far as the SAM program. So the idea is the material for the SAM program that we'd be using something in-house, but the actual SAM position, we wouldn't make any changes to, correct?
We won't, but we will rename it.
Oh, okay.
Because we can no longer call it what the national project calls it.
Mhm.
So we will have to make this Council Bluffs. I think, Mark, you have a name already? CAM.
Okay.
And what does that stand for?
Campus Administrative
Oh.
There we go. So we're going to rename it and use still some of the same guiding principles. It's just be able to do some cost saving. Thank you.
So the specials thing there. Gotten some input from folks about this. And I think it's more about their fears about some things, but I do know like I'd asked you about PE and art, because really there's an extending of a continuous time in those classes. But right now they're served in little blocks, twice a week. So explain that.
So right now currently, and team, jump in if I start going off the rails.
Microphone.
Oh, shoot. Right now, currently, what happens is our special schedule has maybe a 30-minute here and a 20-minute there, 30 and a 30, and they're kind of broke up. And some days you may have two, some days you only have one. And so in reorganizing, this is really something that we heard that our elementary teachers would like a consistent plan time every day. And I agree. I think there should be a consistent, the district I came from, other districts in Iowa and in Nebraska around us has that consistent schedule every day. I know that some of the concerns was around physical education only being 45 minutes versus 2:30s maybe a week. And I can tell you that when you take your class to an elementary special and you walk them there, sometimes when you leave them, you're walking back, and then when you come back, a teacher usually can have about 20 minutes that they really have for a plan time. And so trying to get them more time to be able to plan and collaborate with their other grade level chairs or other teachers in the building. But they still have their recess every day. And I would also say to those that are concerned about physical education is we are not having a physical education class every time that they come to class where they're just all out going, burning energy, right? You have fine mass motor, you have individual, you have team sports, you have cup stacking, you have, juggling going on. And so I grow concerned when people say kids need to burn that energy. We do every day at recess. But physical education is also about teaching skills. It's not about just running. It's not about just getting exercise in. It is more than that. It is a curriculum. So that's one of the pieces. I can also say on the flip side, our music teachers, they wanted an hour. They didn't want 45 minutes because they wanted more time, right? So it was trying to find that happiness in the middle. And I know this brought some stress on some of our counselors, worried about how do I do my small groups? How is it that I take the small groups that I've been working with? But that's what we've been doing with the MTSS, creating that tier one. Tier one where all students get access. Tier one where all students are met. And then tier two, and then tier one. 3. Right. But the problem is being able to look at their schedule and maybe overlaying. And our hope is that they spend time in tier one that creates less students in tier two and tier 3. And so being able, and our counselors will have time. They will still have time. It won't be as much time, but they will still have time. So I say, let us try this for a year. Let us go back and evaluate and see how it goes. I think it's something that we really can make work. And I really want, if we had gone a different direction, I would be standing here before the board saying, I need 9 more positions. Can you take 9 more positions times 65,000 and then add your bennies and tell me how much money I'm asking you for while I'm looking to make other cuts? I can't do that, right? So I got to make it work with what I have, which means that we've got to look at things differently and look at how we serve all children, because children have to be at the center of our work. And sometimes we become focused on adults and what adults want. And I need to do what's best for students. And I need to support my teachers. And I need to support all staff in our schools. And sometimes that means there's a change and there's a shift. And I'm sorry for that. But budget drives some of our choices. It forces choices for us. So that's the reason that we looked at this. Our 168 teachers are going to get a consistent plan time every day. And I celebrate that. I need to help my specialist teachers feel comfortable and working through that. That's why in the summer, when we do our summer academy, we've already told our counselors, we're going to plan time and sessions just for you, just to work with you. And I've met with the elementary principals, and I've told the elementary principals, you have to bring your lead teams together with these schedules and put your specials in there and begin to see how it's going to work. Building autonomy around that.
Yeah, and I do recognize the amount of work that went to come into that, that idea, right, and how to reorganize that, because I know that was, I think way back when we were talking about needing to add more people if we did consistent plan time. So, yeah, to make it work out, I know it's, I mean, I deal with the same things at my work, right? Change, and it's usually not great. You know, so I reference, you know, I understand. I can't remember what the other ones were. So maybe somebody else wants to chat.
Dr. Willett, excuse me. One of the concerns that I've heard is just, maybe you've touched on this a little bit, but the time counselors would have for responsibilities outside of the classroom instruction that they would be doing.
Yeah.
What does that schedule look like for a counselor every day? And in terms of in the new schedule versus the old schedule, the amount of, I don't want to call it free time, but time that you're not in the
In a
classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, currently, we'll take one schedule that we've looked at, and I'm going to pull it out of that memory bank, so you guys help me if I go off the rails, because I'm pulling up the schedules right now in my mind. Currently, our schools have the autonomy where the counselors kind of set their schedules. So one schedule might be that they are in a classroom and working with students in a tier 1 for 11 and a half hours every 2 weeks. Okay, they have an 8-hour day every day. In the new schedule, they would have the first 90 minutes off as students arrive. They would have a 60 minutes or 90? 90, I'm right. 90 minutes, I'm just seeing the schedule. And then they would have a 90-minute block in the middle of the day, and then nothing at the end of the day. There would be one day a week where the counselors would be completely free to service those students that they pull in and set aside. The great concern that I heard from a few of the counselors was, well, I'm a first responder, or what if there's a crisis in the building? And so in working and talking with the building principals, a couple of things I said was, A, counselors should have never been first responders, which I'm told they're not. We have behavioral consultants, we have therapists, and we have family advocates or social workers, right, that line up in the building. And we have our counselors. And CAMs. Yeah, CAMs are number one, our family, yeah. They should be our first responders, our SAMs, right? So you've got about 5 people that can be a responder. Now, if we have a crisis in that building, our principals know that we can send someone to cover where a counselor is and bring them out, if we have one. And someone said, well, you know, discipline could increase because we can't have the small groups. And I would like to test that hypothesis and say that if we teach and counselors are touching base in that tier 1, we should have less tier 2. And I have never walked into one of my buildings from the time I arrived in 2017 and seen 5, 6, 7, as was stated in a meeting to me, of kids in a building not acting appropriately. I have never found that in our building. In fact, maybe I can find 1 or 2, and sometimes it's a specialized program where students are melting down. But never have I seen our buildings out of control. Never have I seen. Do we sometimes have a student that don't feel good that day and it's not responding? You bet. But our students are learning how to self-regulate. That's what we've been working on, and that's what we're encouraging. And that didn't only happen. That takes all in that building, not one group, all. And our classroom teachers took on that SEL curriculum and didn't complain. They took it on. They took on foundations. They took on Classroom 180. They took on online. It's a team effort. And so that's what we're looking for, is that team effort.
Can you talk about the research that you and your team used to come up with the new schedule for the counselors and the specials?
So
That
Dr.
would be
Matthews
helpful.
was my brainchild on this. I can't take any credit for how do we make this happen.
I did say you and your team.
But I have to give credit where credit is due. And I can tell you that really we began to look at this because in our negotiations and transparency, they were asking for our elementary teachers to get a consistent plan time every day. And from that, we began to look at what kind of research said about students having that structure. And every day they know at this time we have a specials class. Every day at this time we have lunch. Every day at this time we have recess. And we know the research says the more structured the day is, the more safe the students feel because they know what's coming and they know what's occurring. They like to see that agenda. They like consistency. They like to feel safe. And so that's really where we went from that request that happened. And Dr. Matthews really went to work on this for us.
No, she didn't. So that's
Yeah,
all right.
yeah, she didn't want to talk. Is that good?
That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or conversation on our cost savings and budget for the upcoming year?
I just want to comment out that it's clear that we have looked in every nook and cranny to find where we can cut costs and make savings. It's not that we're just going for just the big things. We're looking at, one of those was only a $40,000 cost, so we're looking everywhere to do what we can because we have a big deficit to make up for. $3.8 million is not something you can just find laying on the floor. So I just want to thank the administration for doing such a hard job working and looking into everywhere that we can find to find that money.
And for the final, Ms. Ostrowski's going to be quick. We're going to just do, we're going to do a legislative update. I thought it was a great conversation we had last time. We're through the first funnel, and probably I'll ask Ms. Ostrowski to come back after the last funnel occurs. So, Ms. Ostrowski.
Thank you, and thank you, John, for the assist. The first couple, it's good to be with you tonight. Thank you for allowing me to present just a few things for your discussion. The first couple are ones that we talked about before, the open enrollment transportation and the administrative expenses cap. Those are both still alive. Those survived the funnel, and so those are still conversations occurring in our chambers and are likely to get some legs. So if you are interested in advocating for those, for the outcome of those, you still have an opportunity. One that we haven't talked about at this meeting is the online public notice portal. And I wanted to share a little bit about this, which is Senate File 546. It used to be Senate File 480 if you were following it. But it passed the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and what it does is streamlines the public notice process. This is a positive. It decreases the cost to the taxpayer because each notice published previously and currently in the newspaper costs the district money. The website would cost $5 per post, and it would reach a broader audience, searchable on the internet under Council of School Board minutes, for example, or public notices. I checked with Mr. Wilson, and he was kind enough to look up that last year we spent nearly $7,000 in public notices in the nonpareil, as required by law. And so this would be a significant savings for our district and other districts. And again, I mentioned the ease of which people could search and the transparency that provides in terms of public being aware of our board proceedings, for example. House File 614 is the out-of-state teacher license, and this already has passed out of the House unanimously at a 96-0 vote. It was read this week in the Senate Education Committee, and what it does, as said here, is allow those who are in neighboring states, for example, in Nebraska, if they have a valid license that meeting other certain criteria could also then transfer that license to Iowa. And we know we like to make it easy for people to come and teach with us, right? Just a couple of others. The Governor's Chapter 12 bill is Division 3 about it, and it's a multifaceted bill. But it allows up to 5 virtual snow days, or 30 hours, that a district can use for virtual learning. For example, remote days on a snow day, for example. So it allows a little bit more flexibility for Dr. Murillo to take a look at the calendar and say, how can we maybe fit in another professional development day or work day for staff and still have these kind of in the bank, if you will, for snow days.
And then finally, again, the very comprehensive Governor's Parents' Rights and Transparency Bill. I just picked 3 things that I thought were of note. There's quite a bit of detail in there about library materials review processes. And there also is significant language around online posting of publication of the kinds of materials that we use in the classroom. And not only available for parents, but sortable and very detailed related to each grade and class level. And then finally, as part of that larger bill is a requirement that all students would need to pass at 70% or greater the immigration and naturalization test for citizenship. Again, this would be a requirement for graduation under this proposal. So those are a couple of them that I thought were of note. And then, it's getting tired. The second funnel is the end of this month. So at that time, if the bill hasn't gone from one chamber to the other and made it through to the floor, then it dies. However, I will say that, for example, the one bill that is no longer alive is that related to preschool waiting, increasing preschool waiting. But we're not going to give up hope, because it could appear again in an amendment or in one of the appropriations or Ways and Means bills, which are not subject to funnel. So we're going to keep advocating for some waiting to increase the funding we receive for our preschool students, because we are serving them in full-day classrooms, and it's valuable service that we're providing for these families and for the kids in their future. The scheduled session end date is April 28th, but as Dr. Murillo indicated, we may be back before then to figure out what else is still alive and what we can do to advocate for the children and families in our school district.
I had one question regarding the Senate File 496 and the publication of classroom materials. I can't remember, is there a funding stream to help districts pay for this additional expense, or is it got to come out of our?
It
so
isn't.
it's going to be another unfunded mandate.
Yes, that is correct.
Right, okay. And then one might be that I had is, how would the 5% administrative cap affect our school district?
There is no school district in Iowa that is even close to that. It's between about 10 and 20%. The problem is, they've never defined what they talk about administrative costs. So we don't know. What they're going to do is leave it up to the DE. So we have no idea what they're going to count for administrative versus not.
We put a lot of cost in that currently, I feel like.
Yeah, Dean, one time I thought you said we were 11 or 12%.
Yeah, well, it depends what you include, but I figure around 11 or 12%.
Yeah, so in a discussion we had, which I don't want to deter us from any longer, we were talking about when I was younger, we had what we called time and effort sheets. So if I was split coded out of federal and out of operating or state dollars, I had to keep a sheet for the hours that I spent to equal the amount of dollars I was quoted. So if as a superintendent, every time I visit a school, or every time I do a walkthrough, or every time that's an instructional minutes, I would have to code that. So it's time and effort. And so going back to something like that would be just horrible. But that's one way, once they define it, what we would have to do as administrators and as principals. Principals would have to be seen as an instructional leader versus a principal of a school. But when you look at something like that, then who's held accountable for the school, right? So there we go.
Just a couple of things that I wanted to point out for the public, if anybody's watching still. Is, these transparency requirements that, let's presume, at least some of these are going to pass. Accountability requirements, administrative caps, some of these transparency requirements will cost additional money with no new money. None of those requirements will be placed upon private schools who will be getting $335 million in voucher money. None of them. So, it seems to me that transparency and accountability is only important for public school districts. And we are creating two sets of rules for private schools and public schools to have to play by. That's an unfair game to play. So I just want to point that out for our friends. And if you are so inclined to advocate for a few things with our legislators, that administrative cap of 5% is very concerning for a number of reasons, mainly because that definition of administrative costs will be very vague and administered by the Department of Ed. So, you know, the law gives us no indication of what that will be. And this open enrollment busing is also going to be something that we should all be very concerned about in all public school districts, whether you're rural or suburban or urban. We should be very concerned about the ability for school districts to run their buses into other attendance areas.
Not including social emotional items that are still up for grabs, right?
There's so many
I
controversial.
mean, there are so
yeah.
many bills that will have that would potentially have a negative impact on our district. So hope to see y'all at the coffee on Saturday morning.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
And that concludes our reports.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. That brings us to our resolutions. And first, we have an early retirement incentive resolution. Is there a motion?
I'll move that the board approves the early retirement incentive as presented.
I will second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Let's have some discussion around this, just for clarification purposes. And I know that we all, at least some of us, did receive a question or two about this, so we might be able to address that as well.
So I've asked Mr. Milborn to join me. He worked really closely with the committee of teachers that put this new, pretty exciting measure in place. So, Mr. Wilson, will you expand on that for us?
It is exciting. It's something we've been discussing in the Labor Management Committee for quite a bit of time. And it came up in negotiations due to kind of Chapter 20 restrictions. It's not allowed to occur in negotiations. However, we took an ad hoc team from the negotiation team and met a few times and tried to find a solution, which I think is very viable to bring forward to you. That process looked like gathering the funding that is tied to this. There's some restrictions around it. You have to be 55 years old, things of that nature. And so the process looked like creating some spreadsheets, mining that data from our databases. And then to that team, I brought anonymous data, and we started playing with what possible criteria might be. We don't want to set a criteria that's so incentivized that we have 140 people want to retire this year. That would not be obtainable. And we don't want to set a criteria that's so meager that it only incentivizes one or two people. So we tried to find that sweet spot, and where we landed was a rule of 88 within Council Bluffs district. Once again, that was our committee's decision, and that is your years of service for Council Bluffs schools plus your age equaling 88.
And this came about during the negotiations, but there's a timeline that we have to stick to, correct? This has to be approved by a certain amount of time in order to put into place?
Yes, this is tied, the way this has been worded, it's tied to the early retirement incentive, which is tied to Iowa Code 279.46, which is basically how we can use our management fund, so it's not coming out of general fund. And to do that, we need to receive notice from the employee that they're going to retire by April 1st. And really, we need to give people 21 days to consider that opportunity. So we did some communicating on Friday, which was March 10th, and they need to tell us by March 31st about this. So due to negotiations and the timing and us kind of finding a solution, it is a truncated timeline with some speed.
But in the future, we may have more time to.
Yes, we can really only do this on a year-by-year basis.
Right.
So if it's something that we, want to examine again next year, which I based on I want to make certain that there was a committee involved here, and I don't want to speak for them individually, but I feel comfortable saying that they would like to explore this again because it is a way to honor people that have been in our district for a long time, as well as achieve some of the objectives that Dr. Murillo laid out tonight as well.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I had one very quick question. I was wondering if part of the only concern that I had when this first came up is the fact that it had to be renewed every year. You talked a little bit about that detail, but I felt that that was very important to especially call out that it does get renewed every year, and so this decision we will have to come back every year. Could you possibly go into detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the year, it's the reason for the yearly renewal or yearly discussion is due to the it's tied to the management fund and that certain Iowa code.
One of the questions that we received was, or that I received anyway, was about the decision to limit the eligibility to folks who'd been in our district for at least 20 years and that met the rule of 88 in this district. Can you, how was that, how did that come to be?
You know, we were working, the committee was working with the data we had pulled from our systems, right? And so I know a concern that was voiced was someone that had experience outside of Council Bluffs district, you know, for 10, 11, 12 years. And that's not data that we had at our fingertips. So it didn't really occur to us to say, you know, the 150 people that are above age 55 and have been here 20 years, should we try to go pull their employment files from the 70s and 80s and 90s to see if they have employment records from other districts here? It just never really occurred to any of the committee members. We were working with the data that we had in front of us. And so that's really, the decision wasn't made against that or for that. It was just made based on the data set we had.
And we need to take action on this tonight, because if we are going to offer it, the notice has to go out so that people can notify us by April 1st. Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Ms. Shudak?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes. And the early retirement incentive has been approved. Next, we move on to the Council Bluffs Education Association and Board of Directors Agreement for the 2023-2024 school year. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I can move the board approve the agreement between the Council Bluffs Education Association and the Board of Education as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second on this agreement. Any discussion?
I guess I just wanted to recognize and thank Bob and his team and Gary and his team for their work through this. I think it was a pretty collaborative effort. I think this year, and I know Gary does, I think, a great job for us. I'm assuming Bob does a great job for them because he's been in that role a long time. But I know our intent is to honor our employees while still trying to maintain the budget and everything else in these weird times. So just thank you for your efforts.
I second that. I'd like to thank both teams for the efforts and the time that they put in. Just for the public, it was talking about the increases, the plan time, which is huge for every teacher, supplement of classroom supplies, safety language has been put in there. So really, really great items that were added from this year from the previous contract. I echo Bob's sentiments that I wish that there was more permissive language in there, but understand, that's how the negotiation process goes. But I appreciate all the work that was put in from both teams.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Ms. Shudek?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes, the motion carries, and I want to echo our thanks to everyone involved. Finally, we have a motion to set a public hearing on the possible closing of Crescent Elementary. Is there a motion?
I move that the Board of Education directs the school board secretary to schedule a public hearing on March 28th, 2023 at 6:30 PM to obtain public input regarding the possible closing of Crescent Elementary.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Shudek?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes, the motion carries. That concludes our business, and we are adjourned.
Me out.
Thank you very much.
I got notes for me to put in the